He planned the perfect humiliation for his ex at the annual charity gala. But when twin boys rushed through the crowd screaming "Daddy" and hugged his legs, the room fell silent. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test on her tiny bathroom counter. 2 pink lines. Unmistakable. Undeniable. Her heart raced as she sank down onto the closed toilet lid, her mind racing through calculations. She was only 23, working as a waitress at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants to pay for her night classes. This wasn't part of the plan. "Oh God," she whispered, resting her forehead against her palms. She'd been feeling off for weeks, exhaustion beyond her usual fatigue, sudden waves of nausea during shifts. Just yesterday, she'd nearly dropped a tray of champagne flutes when a whiff of a patron's cologne had sent her stomach churning. The bathroom light flickered overhead, a persistent problem in her modest queen's apartment that the landlord never seemed able to fix. Sarah took a deep breath and stood, catching her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, shadows under her eyes from double shifts. But there was something else there now. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of hope. Thomas would be here in less than an hour. Thomas Reynolds, heir to the Reynolds Investments fortune, one of Wall Street's rising stars at 28. For 8 months they'd been seeing each other, always discreetly, always on his terms. She had never been to his Manhattan penthouse, never met his friends or family. Their relationship existed almost exclusively within these 4 walls, in her small apartment that she could barely afford. Sarah moved to the kitchen, pulling out the cheap carnations she'd bought from the bodega on the corner. She arranged them in a chipped vase, trying to brighten the worn space. The January wind whistled through the poorly sealed windows, forcing her to adjust the thermostat again. Another expense she could barely afford. As she arranged the flowers, Sarah allowed herself to dream, just for a moment. Perhaps this would be the thing that would finally make Thomas bring their relationship into the light. Perhaps now he would introduce her to his world, acknowledge what they had built together over these months. Perhaps this baby, this surprise, would be the bridge between their worlds. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Running 15 minutes late. Traffic." Typical. Sarah used the extra time to tidy up, tucking away the textbooks from her IT courses, straightening the threadbare sofa cushions. She changed into a simple blue dress. Nothing fancy, but the one Thomas had once said brought out her eyes. When the knock finally came, her heart leaped into her throat. She opened the door to find Thomas standing there, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, his blonde hair perfectly styled. Even after 8 months, the sight of him still made her pulse quicken. But tonight, something was different. His blue eyes, usually warm when they were alone, held a distant expression. "Hi," she said, stepping back to let him in. "Long day?" Thomas nodded, loosening his tie as he entered. "Endless meetings. The Williams account is proving challenging." He didn't elaborate further, instead glancing around her apartment with what seemed like renewed awareness of its modesty. "Any wine?" Actually, I'm not drinking tonight." Sarah clasped her hands together, suddenly unsure of how to proceed. "Thomas, I need to talk to you about something." He sighed, checking his Rolex. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted, Sarah. I was hoping for a quiet night." "It's important." Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. Taking a deep breath, she went to her purse and pulled out the pregnancy test, protected in a Ziploc bag. She held it out to him, her hand trembling slightly. "I took this morning." Thomas stared at the plastic stick, his expression freezing before transforming from confusion to shock to something darker. "You're pregnant?" His voice was flat. "Yes, and there's more. I went to the clinic today. It's twins." Thomas's face drained of color. He took a step back, then another, as if physically distancing himself from her revelation. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "Are you sure they're mine?" The words fell from his lips like stones. Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. "How can you even ask that? You know there hasn't been anyone else." Thomas began pacing her small living room, compulsively adjusting his Rolex watch. "This wasn't in my plans, Sarah. Not now." He paused, looking at her with cold calculation. "Not with you." "What is that supposed to mean?" Sarah's voice quivered. "It means I'm about to become the youngest executive director in Reynolds Investments history. A pregnancy, and with twins no less, would ruin my career trajectory and my reputation." With mechanical movements, Thomas reached for his Armani briefcase, setting it on her coffee table. He clicked it open and pulled out a checkbook bound in soft leather. "I'll be generous. $50,000. Enough to take care of the problem and start fresh, preferably away from New York." Sarah stared at him, stunned. "Problem? You're talking about our children." "Let's be realistic, Sarah." Thomas's pen moved decisively across the check. "A waitress from the Bronx without a college degree would never have a place in Manhattan high society. You were just temporary entertainment. My family expects me to marry someone from our social circle, someone with pedigree, understand?" He placed the check on the table between them. "This should cover any inconvenience, provided you keep my name out of it. If you try to extort me, my lawyers will destroy you." Sarah looked from the check to Thomas, disbelief warring with growing anger. "You really think this is about money?" Thomas adjusted his tie, avoiding her gaze. "Frankly, yes. What else could it be? We both know you can't raise a child on your own, much less two. I'm being generous here." "Generous?" Sarah felt rage replacing shock. "You think your generosity will buy your way out of fatherhood? There is no fatherhood to discuss. Do what's necessary, but my name won't be involved." Thomas picked up his briefcase. "This was a mistake, Sarah. A mistake I'm willing to pay to correct." As he reached for the door, Sarah snatched up the check and tore it into tiny pieces. "Keep your money, Thomas. I won't get rid of my children, and they won't need your name or your charity." Thomas laughed, a cold sound Sarah would never forget. "Good luck then. We'll see how long that pride lasts when you're trying to feed two mouths on tips." After he left, Sarah collapsed onto her worn sofa, one hand over her still flat stomach, the other clutching the torn remnants of the check. Tears came in waves until exhaustion carried her into sleep. The following months were a test of endurance. As her pregnancy began to show, Sarah was called into the restaurant manager's office one evening before her shift. "Sarah, you've been a valuable employee, but—" The manager's eyes flicked to her growing midsection. "Our clientele expects a certain presentation from our staff. A five-star establishment can't have waitstaff in your conditions serving our exclusive customers." Just like that, her main source of income disappeared. With her savings rapidly dwindling, Sarah secured two part-time jobs, one as a pharmacy clerk during the day and another as a telemarketing operator at night. The money barely covered rent and prenatal appointments. Her younger sister, Melissa, moved into the apartment to help. "You can't keep working like this," she insisted after finding Sarah sobbing from exhaustion one night. "Those babies need you healthy." "What choice do I have?" Sarah asked, rubbing her swollen belly. "No one wants to hire a pregnant woman for anything that pays decent wages." In her 7th month, Sarah fainted while stocking shelves at the pharmacy. The doctor was unequivocal. "Bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. No exceptions." Those forced days of rest became a turning point. Melissa brought home a used laptop from a thrift store, and Sarah began to re-immerse herself in information technology, the field that had always fascinated her but which she'd abandoned out of necessity to work. "You've got to think long-term now," Melissa told her. "Those babies will need more than you can give them waiting tables or answering phones." Sarah spent hours watching tutorials, taking free online courses and practicing coding. Between doctor appointments and prenatal classes, she built a simple website for her landlord's brother's deli. He paid her $75, her first income as a programmer. On a humid September night after 18 hours of labor, Sarah gave birth to identical twin boys in a public hospital in the Bronx. Michael came first, followed 7 minutes later by Ethan. When the nurses placed them in her arms, Sarah felt a surge of love so powerful it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "They're perfect," whispered Melissa, stroking each tiny head. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. In the sterile light of the maternity ward, she studied their tiny features, the same blue eyes that their father had, the same strong chin. They were Reynolds in appearance, but they would be Mitchells in name and spirit. As Melissa stepped out to call their mother with the news, Sarah held her sons close, whispering a silent promise. "You will never know what rejection feels like, and one day, Thomas Reynolds will swallow every word he said about us." The twins slept peacefully, unaware of the obstacles they had already overcome or the challenges that lay ahead. In their innocent faces, Sarah saw not the man who had abandoned them, but the future she would build for them through sheer determination. That night, as she watched her newborn sons under the lights of the Bronx public maternity ward, Sarah made a silent vow. "You will never know what rejection feels like, and one day, Thomas Reynolds will swallow every word he said about us." The twins slept in Sarah's arms, their tiny faces peaceful and unaware of the storm they had all weathered to arrive at this moment. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Through the window, the Bronx skyline glittered against the September night, a world away from the Manhattan Towers where Thomas Reynolds was probably celebrating another successful deal. "They're perfect," Melissa whispered again, as if saying it repeatedly would create a protective shield around these fragile new lives. 3 days later, Sarah brought the twins home to her small apartment, now cramped with the addition of 2 bassinets squeezed into her bedroom. As she carefully laid Michael and Ethan down, the television in the living room blared breaking news. Lehman Brothers had collapsed, and Wall Street was in freefall. "Turn that up," Sarah called to Melissa, who was organizing baby supplies in the kitchen. The reporter's voice filled the apartment. "What experts are calling the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression? Markets worldwide are plummeting as the subprime mortgage crisis deepens." Sarah leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion washing over her. "Perfect timing," she muttered. Not only was she a single mother to newborn twins, but she was bringing them into a world where the economy was imploding. That first month passed in a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and feedings. Sarah's body ached from the delivery, her breasts were tender from nursing, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Yet each time she looked at her sons, a fierce determination rose within her. "You need to sleep," Melissa insisted one night, finding Sarah pacing the living room with Ethan wailing against her shoulder while Michael fussed in the portable crib. "Sleep is for people who don't have twins," Sarah replied, her voice hoarse from fatigue. She gently swayed, humming an off-key lullaby that somehow soothed Ethan's cries. By the second month, a routine of sorts emerged. Melissa took care of the babies in the morning while Sarah caught a few hours of rest. Then Melissa would leave for her shift at the diner, and Sarah would be on her own until evening. Their tiny apartment became a fortress against the outside world, which seemed to grow more chaotic with each passing day as the financial crisis deepened. At the kitchen table, surrounded by baby bottles and burp cloths, Sarah spread out her bills: rent, utilities, formula, since her milk supply couldn't keep up with 2 hungry boys, diapers. She separated the few wrinkled bills in her wallet into careful piles, knowing it wasn't enough. "How are we supposed to survive on this?" she whispered to the empty kitchen. Her savings were nearly depleted, and the meager unemployment benefits wouldn't last forever. The next day, Sarah bundled the twins into their second-hand stroller and ventured out to look for work. She visited shops, restaurants, offices, anywhere that might hire someone with her skills. But the responses were always the same: sympathetic looks followed by rejection. "I'm sorry, but with the economy as it is, we're letting people go, not hiring. We need someone with more flexibility, with your situation and all." One manager was more direct. "2 babies at home? How would you manage the hours here? It's not practical." 3 weeks of rejections later, Sarah secured an interview for a receptionist position at a small accounting firm. She arrived early, hair neatly styled, wearing her one good blouse, leaving the twins with Melissa. "Your resume is impressive for someone your age," the manager said, reviewing her experience. "But I notice a gap in employment these last few months." "I recently had twins," Sarah replied honestly, "but I have reliable childcare and am fully committed to a professional schedule." The manager's expression shifted subtly. "I see. And how would you manage if one of your children became ill, or if your childcare fell through?" "I have contingency plans," Sarah assured him, though in reality her only backup was Melissa, who had her own job to maintain. "Ms. Mitchell, I appreciate your candor, but this position requires someone who can guarantee consistent availability. With 2 infants at home, I'm concerned about reliability issues." Sarah left the interview with her head held high, but once around the corner, tears of frustration stung her eyes. It seemed an impossible situation. She needed work to support her children, but having children made finding work nearly impossible. After dozens of rejections, Sarah finally secured 2 part-time positions. During the day, she answered phones at a small insurance office where the elderly owner took pity on her situation. At night, she cleaned offices in a commercial building where she could bring the sleeping twins in their stroller. "You should be sleeping when they sleep," Melissa scolded, finding Sarah vacuuming office cubicles at midnight, the twins bundled in their stroller nearby. "Bills don't pay themselves," Sarah replied, pushing the vacuum with one hand while gently rocking the stroller with the other. The exhaustion became a constant companion. There were days when Sarah couldn't remember if she'd eaten, when changing from pajamas to regular clothes seemed an insurmountable task. After 3 days with barely 4 hours of sleep, she collapsed on the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably while the twins napped. "You need to rest," Melissa insisted, taking the babies from her. "I'll watch them for a few hours. Sleep, Sarah. Just sleep." Those precious hours of uninterrupted rest became a turning point. When Sarah woke, her mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. She realized she couldn't continue this way, working jobs that barely covered expenses while missing precious moments with her sons. 2 months later, Ethan developed a high fever that wouldn't break. The pediatrician prescribed antibiotics that weren't covered by Sarah's basic insurance. Standing at the pharmacy counter, she felt her heart sink at the cost. "Do you have a generic version?" she asked the pharmacist. "This is the generic," he replied sympathetically. "The name brand would be twice as much." That night, Sarah sold her grandmother's pearl earrings, the only piece of jewelry she owned worth anything, to a pawn shop for enough money to buy the medicine and cover that month's heating bill. When Melissa came home to find her sister cradling a feverish Ethan while checking their nearly empty pantry, she made a decision. "I have something for you," Melissa said the next day, coming home with a bulky package wrapped in newspaper. "It's not new, but it works." Inside was a used laptop computer, its silver case scratched but intact. "Where did you get this?" Sarah asked, touching it reverently. "Thrift store near work. Manager gave me a discount," Melissa shrugged. "You keep talking about those IT courses you were taking before everything. Don't give up on that. The babies need you to dream bigger." That night, after the twins were asleep, Sarah opened the laptop and began to reconnect with the world of technology she'd reluctantly abandoned. She found free coding tutorials online, forums where developers shared knowledge, and open-source projects she could study. In the small hours between midnight feedings and dawn diaper changes, Sarah taught herself programming languages, database management, and web design. The laptop became her window to a future beyond cleaning offices and answering phones. "Look what I made," she told Melissa one morning, showing her a simple website she'd created. "It's a tracking app for baby milestones. You can log feedings, sleep patterns, growth." "That's impressive," Melissa said, genuinely amazed. Could other mothers use something like this? The question sparked an idea. Sarah refined the application, making it more user-friendly, adding features other mothers might find helpful. When the twins were napping, she would code. When they were awake, she would test the interface with them, tracking their actual feeding schedules and sleep patterns. At 12 months old, Michael and Ethan were developing distinct personalities. Michael was methodical, stacking blocks with surprising precision for his age. Ethan was more exploratory, crawling to investigate every corner of their small apartment. Both had Thomas's blue eyes and strong chin, but their curious expressions and determined spirits were all Sarah. One afternoon, while the twins played on a blanket at her feet in the local library, which offered free Wi-Fi, Sarah posted about her baby tracking application on a forum for new mothers. "I created this app to help track my twins' development," she wrote. "It's nothing fancy, but it's helped me stay organized through sleep deprivation. If anyone would find it useful, I'm happy to share it." She expected a few polite responses, maybe some suggestions for improvements. Instead, within hours, dozens of mothers had replied. "This is exactly what I've been looking for. Does it work on mobile? I'd pay for something like this. Can you add a feature for tracking medication doses?" Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. These women, strangers, saw value in something she'd created between diaper changes and nighttime feedings. One private message particularly caught her attention. "I love your app design. I'm a mother of 3 and find it incredibly intuitive. Would you consider customizing it for my specific needs? I'd be happy to pay $75 for your time." That night, Sarah sat on the floor of her apartment, watching her sons sleep in their cribs. For the first time since they were born, she felt a glimmer of hope that didn't depend on someone else's charity or pity. She had created something valuable using only her mind and determination. The next morning, she replied to the message, "I'd be happy to customize the app for you. Let me know exactly what features you need." Over the next week, Sarah spent every free moment enhancing the application based on the mother's requirements. When she delivered the customized version, the woman was so pleased she immediately transferred $75 to Sarah's PayPal account and recommended her to 2 friends. While Sarah contemplated the first offer of $75 to customize her app for another mother, she didn't fathom that this moment marked the birth of what would become Mitchell Tech Solutions, valued in billions. 3 years had passed since that momentous night when Sarah first saw $75 appear in her PayPal account. Now 26, she moved through her modest apartment with purpose, balancing her laptop in one hand while helping Michael put on his sneakers with the other. The twins, now 3 years old, sat on the edge of the sofa, their identical blue eyes watching her with curiosity. "Remember, we're visiting Ms. Rose after your play group," Sarah reminded them, brushing Michael's hair out of his eyes. The same eyes as Thomas's, though she tried not to dwell on that thought. "Can we bring cookies?" Ethan asked, already more thoughtful than most children twice his age. "That's a wonderful idea," Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Despite their circumstances, she was raising compassionate boys. Life had found a rhythm, albeit a challenging one. Sarah's baby tracking application had evolved into a subscription service called Baby Steps, generating a modest but steady income that supplemented her part-time work as a virtual assistant. It wasn't wealth by any measure, but they were no longer counting pennies for milk. Later that afternoon, a woman approached Sarah at the community playground where the twins were climbing on the jungle gym. Sarah recognized her from the local mothers group. "I've been meaning to thank you," the woman said, settling beside Sarah on the bench. "Your Baby Steps app helped me track Emma's fever patterns last month. The doctor was impressed with how detailed my records were." Sarah smiled, watching her sons take turns sliding down the small slide. "I'm glad it helped." The woman reached into her purse, pulling out a $20 bill. "I know you only charge $10 for the premium version, but it's worth double. You saved me so much stress." Accepting the money with quiet gratitude, Sarah tucked it into her pocket. These small validations meant everything. Proof that her late nights learning JavaScript and Python while the twins slept weren't wasted. That evening, they visited Rose Miller, the 72-year-old widow who lived one floor below them. Once a vibrant retired school teacher who had baked cookies for the twins' second birthday, Rose had been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer 6 months ago. The chemotherapy had taken her silver hair and much of her energy, but not her sharp mind or kind heart. "My favorite visitors," Rose called weakly from her recliner as Sarah and the twins entered with a container of homemade soup and the promised cookies. "Careful with Ms. Rose," Sarah reminded the boys as they approached with their drawings. "Remember, she feels tired from her medicine." Ethan carefully placed his crayon masterpiece on Rose's lap. "I drew you flowers because you can't go to the park." Rose's eyes misted as she examined the colorful scribbles. "These are much prettier than real flowers, dear." While the twins showed Rose their artwork, Sarah moved to the kitchen, noticing the disarray of pill bottles on the counter. Some were open, others tipped over. A handwritten schedule was smudged and barely legible. "Rose, are you keeping track of your medications?" Sarah asked, concerned. The older woman sighed. "I try, but there are so many now. Different times, different doses, some with food, some without. Yesterday I couldn't remember if I'd taken the anti-nausea pill or just thought about taking it." Sarah frowned, picking up several bottles to read the labels. "This is too complicated for anyone to manage without help." That night, after tucking the twins into their beds in the room they all still shared, Sarah opened her laptop. Instead of working on her baby steps updates as planned, she began sketching a new interface, a medication tracking system with reminders, dosage recordings, and symptom logs. By morning, she had a basic prototype. After dropping the twins at their affordable community daycare 2 days a week, a luxury she could finally afford, Sarah returned to refine her design. When it was presentable, she walked downstairs to Rose's apartment. "I developed something to help you keep track of your medications," Sarah explained, showing Rose the program on her laptop. "See? It sends alerts when it's time to take each pill, lets you check them off, and records any side effects you experience." Rose adjusted her glasses, leaning forward to see the screen better. "You made this for me? Overnight?" "I couldn't stop thinking about all those bottles on your counter," Sarah admitted. "It's simple right now, but I'll add features as we figure out what works best for you." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah refined the application based on Rose's feedback, adding a function to track water intake, mood changes, and appointment reminders. Rose's medication adherence improved immediately, and she began bringing her laptop to doctor appointments to show her progress. During one such visit while Rose was getting blood drawn, her oncologist, Dr. James Chen, noticed the application open on her laptop. "What program is that?" he asked, adjusting his glasses as he studied the screen. "I've never seen this interface before." "My neighbor made it for me," Rose explained proudly. "She lives upstairs with her twin boys. Brilliant young woman. This has changed everything for me. I haven't missed a single dose in 3 weeks." "Doctor." Chen scrolled through the logged information, clearly impressed. "The longitudinal symptom tracking is particularly useful. And you say your neighbor designed this herself?" When Rose returned home, she immediately called Sarah. "My doctor wants to meet you. He was absolutely fascinated by your program." Sarah almost dropped the phone. "What? Why?" "He said he's never seen anything so user-friendly for medication management. He thinks it could help other patients." 2 days later, Sarah found herself sitting across from Dr. Chen in the hospital cafeteria, her laptop open between them, the twins quietly coloring at the next table. She'd dressed in her most professional outfit, black pants and a blue blouse she'd found on clearance, but still felt underdressed in the hospital environment. This interface is remarkably intuitive, Dr. Chen said, navigating through the application. Most medical software is designed by programmers who've never spoken to a patient. Yours clearly puts the user experience first. Sarah tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, trying to appear more confident than she felt. I built it specifically for Rose's needs, but the framework could be adapted. That's exactly what interests me. Dr. Chen leaned forward, lowering his voice. Our hospital's current medication management system is outdated and complicated. Patients struggle with it, especially older ones or those with chronic conditions. Sarah's heart raced as she realized where this conversation was heading. Would you be interested in developing a version of this for our oncology patients? Dr. Chen asked. We would need to add HIPAA compliance, integration with our record system, and expand the functionality, but the core design is exactly what we've been looking for. Yes, I would be very interested, Sarah managed, her mind already racing with possibilities and challenges. Later that afternoon, while the twins played on the swings, Sarah's phone rang with a call from the hospital's administrative office. Dr. Chen spoke highly of your software solution. We'd like to discuss contracting you officially to develop a patient management system for our oncology department. Sarah gripped the phone tightly, watching her sons laugh as they soared through the air, pushed by another parent. This wasn't just a one-off payment from a grateful mother. This was a real opportunity, a door opening to the future she'd been working toward through sleepless nights and countless sacrifices. The following weeks became a blur of intense work. Sarah programmed during every available moment, while the twins napped after they went to bed during their playgroup sessions. Her small living room became her office, littered with notebooks filled with code snippets and user interface sketches. Melissa, who now lived nearby with her fiancé, helped with childcare during crucial development periods. I've never seen you so focused, she remarked one evening, finding Sarah still typing furiously at 2 a.m. This has to be perfect, Sarah replied without looking up. It's not just about the money anymore. Dr. Chen is trusting me with something that will affect real patients. The hospital named the system MediTrack, and Sarah worked closely with nurses to test the interface, adjusting features based on their practical feedback. She learned medical terminology overnight, researched healthcare compliance regulations, and rebuilt entire sections when they didn't perform intuitively enough for tired staff. You look exhausted, Dr. Chen commented 3 months into development, finding Sarah debugging code in a small break room, dark circles under her eyes. I'm fine, she insisted, though she'd been surviving on 4 hours of sleep most nights. This project shouldn't come at the expense of your health, he said kindly. We can extend the timeline. Sarah shook her head. My boys need this to succeed, she said simply. What she didn't add was how much she personally needed it to succeed, needed to prove that Thomas had been wrong about her potential, even if he would never know it. When the final testing phase was complete, Sarah was called to a meeting with the hospital administration. She dressed in a newly purchased business suit, her first, and arranged for Melissa to watch the twins. Before leaving, she knelt before her sons. Mommy has an important meeting today, she explained, straightening Michael's collar. If it goes well, we might be able to move to a bigger apartment soon. Will we still see Ms. Rose? Ethan asked, his concern for others already evident at 3. Of course, Sarah promised, touched by his compassion. We'll always make time for the people we care about. The meeting room was intimidating, a long table surrounded by administrators in expensive suits and medical professionals with impressive credentials. Sarah took her designated seat, setting up her presentation with hands she willed not to tremble. For the next hour, she demonstrated MediTrack's capabilities, explaining how it simplified medication management while providing valuable data to healthcare providers. She answered technical questions confidently and addressed concerns about implementation with practical solutions. When she finished, the hospital's chief administrator leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, Dr. Chen's enthusiasm for your system appears well-founded. We've reviewed the pilot program results, and patient medication adherence improved by 62%. That's remarkable. Sarah nodded, maintaining her professional composure despite the internal surge of pride. We would like to offer $75,000 for the initial license with an annual maintenance contract to be negotiated separately, he continued. Does that align with your expectations? The figure, more money than Sarah had ever seen at once, momentarily robbed her of speech. She had rehearsed this moment, practiced appearing unimpressed by whatever they offered, but the reality was overwhelming. That would be acceptable, she managed to respond, her voice steadier than she felt. Walking out of the hospital an hour later with a signed preliminary agreement, Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called Melissa. I got it, Mel, she said, tears finally breaking through her professional facade. They're paying $75,000 for the license. Melissa's scream of joy was so loud Sarah had to hold the phone away from her ear. I knew you could do it. Those nights studying while the boys slept are finally paying off. That evening, Sarah took the twins to a toy store, not the dollar store where she usually bought their small treats, but a real toy store with colorful aisles and possibilities. Mommy sold her computer program, she explained as their eyes widened at the display of toys. We can each pick out something special today. While Michael deliberated between dinosaurs and building blocks, and Ethan examined a science kit with fascination, Sarah watched them with a heart full of possibilities. This wasn't just about toys. It was about a future opening before them, opportunities that had seemed impossible just years earlier. As she signed her first commercial contract, Sarah couldn't imagine that in less than a decade she would be refusing an offer of $500 million for the company that was born from the desire to help an ailing neighbor. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind still processing the enormity of what had just happened. $75,000. The sum seemed surreal, enough to change everything while somehow making her accomplishment feel tangible. As the twins finally drifted to sleep, clutching their new toys, she allowed herself a moment of pure, unfiltered pride. The next morning, Sarah woke with a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt since before the twins were born. Her first step was finding office space, somewhere professional but affordable, close enough to home that she could manage emergencies with the twins. The search led her to a small, worn building in the heart of the Bronx, its lobby faded but clean, its rates within her budget. It's not much, the building manager admitted, unlocking a door to reveal a cramped space with peeling paint and fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. But the internet connection is solid, and you've got your own bathroom. Sarah walked to the smudged window, looking out at the neighborhood where she'd grown up. Not Manhattan, not even close, but it was a start. I'll take it, she said decisively. Over the next week, Sarah transformed the space, painting the walls herself in the evenings after the twins were asleep. She scoured secondhand stores for decent furniture, assembled IKEA desks with determination if not skill, and hung a simple sign on the door. Mitchell Tech Solutions. The hospital contract provided enough capital to sustain her for months, but Sarah knew she needed a team to build something lasting. After posting job listings at local community colleges, she interviewed a dozen candidates before finding the right fit. David Chen was 24, a brilliant programmer who dropped out of MIT when his father's medical bills bankrupted the family. Priya Patel had just graduated with honors in software engineering but was struggling to find work without experience. Both accepted Sarah's modest salary offers in exchange for something potentially more valuable: equity in whatever Mitchell Tech might become. I can only pay you 2/3 of what you'd make elsewhere, Sarah explained frankly during their joint orientation, the office still smelling of fresh paint. But I'm offering 5% ownership each. If we succeed, that could be worth much more in the future. Your concept is solid, David said, examining the Meditrack interface. I've seen hospital systems that cost millions and do half what this does. Healthcare tech is due for disruption, Priya added. My mother's a nurse. The stories she tells about their outdated systems would make you cry. Together, the trio refined MediTrack, transforming it from a patient-focused tool into a comprehensive healthcare management system. Sarah leveraged the Bronx hospital success to secure meetings with other facilities, though these encounters often tested her resolve. "How many years have you been in healthcare tech?" asked one executive, a man in his 50s who had barely glanced at her presentation. "Our company is new," Sarah acknowledged, "but our system has already demonstrated significant improvements in patient outcomes at Bronx General." "And how old are you exactly?" another executive interrupted, exchanging smirks with colleagues. Sarah straightened her posture, wearing her youth-like armor rather than an apology. "I'm 26, old enough to identify problems others have ignored and solve them effectively." Despite the skepticism, MediTrack's results spoke volumes. By the end of their first quarter, they had scheduled demonstrations at 5 additional hospitals. Each presentation made Sarah more confident. Each dismissive comment fueled her determination to prove her worth. Meanwhile, the twins started kindergarten, a milestone that filled Sarah with both pride and anxiety. The morning of their first day, she helped them into their new outfits, taking photos as they posed with their backpacks. "You both look so grown up," she said, kneeling to straighten Michael's collar. "Remember what we talked about? Be kind, listen to your teacher, and it's okay to be nervous." "Are you nervous too, Mommy?" Ethan asked perceptively, noticing her trembling hands. "A little," Sarah admitted. "But that's okay. New things are always a bit scary, even for grown-ups." After dropping them off, Sarah lingered outside the school building, watching through the window until they were settled. Only then did she rush across town for her meeting with potential investors, changing from casual clothes to her single business suit in the back of a taxi. The meeting was with Brightstone Capital, a small investment firm Sarah had researched extensively. Their portfolio included several healthcare startups, and they had a reputation for supporting female entrepreneurs. This was her first pitch for external funding, and Sarah had rehearsed for weeks. "Your technical solution is impressive," said Jonathan Wells, the firm's principal partner, after her presentation. "But scaling requires experience. Have you considered bringing on a more seasoned CEO? Perhaps we could introduce you to someone—" "I've built this company from nothing while raising twins alone," Sarah responded, maintaining a professional tone despite the sting. "I'm not looking for someone to take over. I'm looking for partners who believe in what we've created and want to help it grow." "Perhaps we should wait for your husband to discuss the financial aspects," another partner suggested with a patronizing smile. The room went silent as Sarah packed her materials with deliberate calm. "There is no husband. There is only me, my children, and my company. And clearly, we're not a good fit for your investment model." Walking out of that meeting was difficult, but Sarah refused to surrender control of her vision to secure funding. The rejection stung, but it also clarified her path forward. She would grow more organically, through contracts and proven results rather than external investment. The twins' school schedule added another layer of complexity to Sarah's already demanding life. Parent-teacher conferences, school performances, doctor appointments, each required careful planning and often difficult choices. On the day of the twins' first school play, Sarah was scheduled to demonstrate MediTrack to the procurement committee at Queens Memorial Hospital, a potential contract worth over $100,000. After trying unsuccessfully to reschedule either event, she made her decision. "I need to move our presentation up by 2 hours," she told David and Priya. "My boys are performing in their first school play at 3 o'clock, and I won't miss it." The meeting at Queens Memorial was tense but productive. Sarah delivered a flawless presentation, answered technical questions with confidence, and was walking out the door by 2:30. She arrived at the elementary school auditorium breathless but on time, slipping into a seat as the children were lining up backstage. "You made it," whispered a mother beside her, whom Sarah recognized from drop-offs. "I was wondering if you'd be here, with your big career and all." The comment was designed to sting, but Sarah merely smiled. "I wouldn't miss it for anything. When Michael and Ethan appeared on stage as trees in the forest scene, Sarah's heart swelled with pride. They might not have the fanciest costumes or the biggest parts, but they were thriving despite every obstacle life had placed in their path. As Mitchell Tech secured more hospital contracts, Sarah's reputation began to grow within the healthcare technology community. At an industry conference in New York, she was mistaken for an assistant while setting up her company's modest booth. "Excuse me, when will the Mitchell Tech representative arrive?" asked a woman in an expensive suit, barely glancing at Sarah. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, founder and CEO," she replied, extending her hand. "And you are?" The woman's surprise was evident, but she quickly recovered. "Elena Rodriguez, CTO at Manhattan Memorial. Your system has been generating buzz. I'd like to see a demonstration." What began as a brief demo evolved into an hour-long discussion of healthcare technology challenges. Elena, a 20-year veteran of hospital information systems, was refreshingly direct. "What you've built solves problems that systems costing millions ignore," she said, navigating through Meditrack's interface. "Who's your design team?" "Currently, myself and 2 developers," Sarah admitted. "We're small but focused." Instead of the dismissal Sarah expected, Elena nodded appreciatively. "That explains why it actually works for end users. Most systems are designed by committees who've never spent a day on a hospital floor." Their conversation continued over coffee, evolving from technical specifics to broader industry challenges. By the end, Elena had not only expressed interest in Meditrack for Manhattan Memorial, but offered to introduce Sarah to colleagues at other hospitals. "The healthcare tech world is still very much a boys' club," Elena warned as they exchanged contact information. "You'll face more skepticism than you deserve. But this product is exceptional, and I'd like to help it succeed." Elena became more than a client. She became a mentor and advocate, introducing Sarah to her extensive network of healthcare administrators. With Elena's endorsement, doors that had been firmly closed suddenly opened. Within months, Mitchell Tech had contracts with 3 additional hospitals. As the company grew, so did their needs. Their tiny office became cramped with new equipment and the occasional additional contractor. During one particularly frantic development sprint, Sarah, David, and Priya worked through the night, fueled by cheap pizza and determination to meet a crucial deadline. "We did it," Sarah announced at 3 in the morning as the final tests ran successfully. "Version 2.0 is ready for deployment." They toasted with lukewarm soda, exhausted but triumphant. In that moment, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and computer monitors, Sarah felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before the twins were born. She was part of a team, building something meaningful. With the company's growth came personal possibilities. After 2 years in their small Queens apartment, Sarah began searching for a new home, somewhere safer, with more space for the boys to grow and play. The real estate agent showed them several options, each slightly beyond what Sarah had initially budgeted. The third property, a modest but well-maintained 3-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good schools, immediately felt right. "Each of the boys could have their own room," the agent pointed out, "and there's a small backyard." Sarah watched as Michael and Ethan raced through the empty rooms, their voices echoing with excitement. "We like this one, Mom!" they called in near unison, their footsteps thundering down the hallway. "It's at the top of your price range," the agent cautioned. "Are you sure your business is stable enough?" Sarah thought about the contracts they'd secured, the expansion plans in development, and the growing recognition of Mitchell Tech in the industry. "Yes," she said confidently. "We'll take it." That evening, Sarah and the twins sat on the floor of their new, empty living room, eating pizza off paper plates and drinking grape juice from plastic cups. The twins had insisted on a picnic dinner to celebrate, and Sarah had readily agreed. "To our new home," she toasted, raising her cup of juice. "To new bedrooms," Michael added enthusiastically. "To being homeowners," Ethan said solemnly, having absorbed the significance of the purchase. as her sons drifted to sleep on air mattresses in what would become their bedrooms. Sarah sat in the empty living room, planning furniture arrangements and dreaming of the future. The journey from that devastating night with Thomas to this moment had been arduous, but every sacrifice had led her here, to independence, to growth, to creating a stable home for her children. While observing her sons sleeping on mattresses on the floor of their new apartment, Sarah couldn't imagine that 6 years later she would be deciding which contemporary art pieces would adorn the walls of the triplex penthouse she would purchase outright in Manhattan. 3 years passed with the momentum of a freight train. What had begun as a single hospital contract had grown into a thriving business with 12 established clients across the eastern seaboard. The Mitchell Tech Solutions logo, a simple, elegant design Sarah had created herself during a rare quiet evening, now adorned the entrance of their expanded office space in the Bronx, where 25 employees worked diligently to refine and support the Meditrack system. Sarah stood by the window of her private office, watching the morning bustle on the street below. At 31, she carried herself with a confidence that had been hard-won through countless meetings where she'd been underestimated, through negotiations where her youth and gender had been seen as liabilities rather than strengths. Her wardrobe had evolved from discount store finds to carefully selected professional attire, not yet designer labels but quality pieces that projected the image of a successful CEO. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "The quarterly reports are ready for review," said Priya, now the company's chief technology officer. The once shy programmer had blossomed into a formidable technical leader, overseeing a team of 12 developers. "How do we look?" Sarah asked, accepting the folder. Priya's smile was answer enough. "Revenue is up 23% from last quarter. The Brooklyn Presbyterian implementation came in under budget and 2 weeks ahead of schedule." Sarah flipped through the reports, satisfaction warming her chest. Every successful implementation, every positive client testimonial felt like a personal vindication, proof that Thomas had been catastrophically wrong about her potential. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Johnson, the twins' after-school caregiver. Boys settled in office conference room with homework. Michael asking about algorithms again. At 8 years old, the twins were becoming increasingly curious about their mother's work. Michael, with his analytical mind, had begun asking questions about programming logic that sometimes left Sarah scrambling for age-appropriate explanations. Ethan, equally brilliant but more people-oriented, was fascinated by how the software helped patients. Later that afternoon, Sarah found them in the conference room, school papers spread across the polished table. Michael was solving math problems with the focused intensity he brought to everything, while Ethan sketched what appeared to be a hospital room in his notebook. "How was school today?" Sarah asked, kissing the tops of their heads. "We learned about fractions," Michael said without looking up. "It's easy." "Ms. Rivera said my science project was the best in class," Ethan added proudly. "She wants me to enter it in the district competition." Sarah sat between them, heart swelling with pride. Despite the chaos of building a company, she had somehow managed to raise 2 remarkable boys. They were thriving in the private school she'd enrolled them in last year, a decision that had felt both extravagant and necessary. The tuition had initially made her stomach clench, but the individualized attention and advanced curriculum were exactly what her gifted sons needed. "Mom," Michael said suddenly, looking up from his homework, "Jake at school said he saw your name in a magazine. Are you famous?" Sarah laughed softly. "Not famous, just working hard. Some business magazines have written about our company because what we're building is helping hospitals take better care of patients." "So you are important," Ethan concluded with the straightforward logic of childhood. Before Sarah could respond, her assistant appeared at the door. "Ms. Mitchell, there's a call you might want to take. Martin Goldman from Ascension Ventures." Sarah's pulse quickened. Ascension was a respected venture capital firm specializing in healthcare technology. They had reached out last week after one of their portfolio company's executives had seen Meditrack in action at Columbia Presbyterian. "I'll be right there," she said, then turned back to the twins. "Duty calls. Finish your homework, and maybe we can stop for ice cream on the way home." In her office, Sarah took a deep breath before picking up the phone. "This is Sarah Mitchell." "Ms. Mitchell, Martin Goldman here. I hope I'm not interrupting your day." "Not at all, Mr. Goldman. I've been looking forward to speaking with you. Please call me Martin. I've been hearing remarkable things about Meditrack. When our CEO at HealthStream mentioned your system had reduced medication errors by 47% at Columbia, I knew I needed to learn more about the mind behind it." The conversation flowed easily as Martin asked insightful questions about Meditrack's development, Sarah's vision for expansion, and the challenges of bootstrapping a healthcare technology company. Unlike previous investors who had patronized her, Martin seemed genuinely interested in her perspective. "I'd like to meet in person," he said finally. "What you've built is extraordinary, especially considering you've done it without external capital. I think Ascension could help take Mitchell Tech to the next level, if that's something you're interested in exploring." After scheduling a meeting for the following week, Sarah sat quietly at her desk, processing the conversation. External investment had always been a possibility she'd considered with caution. The horror stories of founders pushed out of their own companies loomed large in her mind. That evening she called Elena Rodriguez, who had become both mentor and friend over the past 2 years. "Ascension has a good reputation," Elena confirmed after Sarah relayed the conversation, "but venture capital always comes with strings. The question is whether those strings will pull you in directions you want to go anyway." "I've built this from nothing," Sarah said, watching from her kitchen window as the twins played in the backyard of their Queens home. "The idea of giving up control terrifies me." "Then don't," Elena replied simply. "You're negotiating from a position of strength here. Your company is profitable, growing steadily, with a product that demonstrably improves patient outcomes. That's rare in this industry. If you do take investment, make sure the terms allow you to maintain your vision." The meeting with Martin took place at a quiet restaurant in Manhattan. Sarah arrived early, dressed in a new navy suit she'd purchased specifically for this occasion, the most she'd ever spent on a single outfit, yet still modest by Manhattan business standards. "I've reviewed your financials," Martin said after preliminaries were concluded. "Very impressive growth trajectory, especially without outside capital. But I'm curious, why reach out to investors now?" Sarah appreciated his directness. Meditrack has proven itself in individual hospitals. The next step is integration across healthcare systems, allowing patient data to flow securely between facilities. That requires a significant development investment and connections to larger healthcare networks, both areas where a strategic partner could accelerate our growth. For 2 hours, they discussed possibilities, challenges, and visions for the future of healthcare technology. Unlike other investors Sarah had encountered, Martin asked questions that revealed a genuine understanding of both the technical and human aspects of medical systems. "I want to be clear about something," Martin said as their meeting concluded. "Ascension invests in companies, but more importantly, we invest in founders. I'm interested in Mitchell Tech because of what you've built and your vision for its future. I want to provide capital and connections to help you grow faster, not to control or change your fundamental approach." The weeks that followed were filled with due diligence meetings, legal reviews, and late-night conversations with Elena about the implications of various term sheet provisions. Sarah insisted on maintaining majority ownership and control of the board, points that might have been deal-breakers with other investors but which Martin seemed to respect. Finally, after nearly 2 months of negotiations, Sarah gathered David, Priya, and the company's 3 other early employees in the conference room. The twins were at school, but this meeting would shape their future as surely as it would shape the company's. "The final terms are $5 million for 15% equity," Sarah explained, passing copies of the agreement summary around the table. "Martin will join our board, along with one other Ascension representative, but we maintain control with 3 seats. Most importantly, we all keep our existing equity percentages proportionally diluted. 5 million, David whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. Remember when we were excited about a $75,000 contract? This changes everything, Priya added. We can finally build that interoperability layer we've been planning. Sarah nodded, feeling both excitement and trepidation. It also means higher expectations, more scrutiny, and growing faster than we might have otherwise. I want everyone to understand what we're signing up for. The next day, surrounded by lawyers in Ascension's sleek Manhattan office, Sarah signed the documents with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Michael and Ethan, brought along to witness this pivotal moment, watched with curious eyes from the corner of the conference room, trying to understand the significance of what was happening. "Congratulations, Sarah," Martin said, shaking her hand after the final signature was applied. "I believe we're going to build something remarkable together." With $5 million in the company account, Mitchell Tech Solutions entered a new phase. Sarah leased a larger, more modern office space in Brooklyn, hired 8 additional developers, and initiated the ambitious interoperability project that would allow Meditrack to share data securely across different healthcare systems. The capital also allowed for a personal milestone. After years of renting, Sarah purchased a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a peaceful Queens neighborhood with excellent schools. It wasn't ostentatious, certainly nothing like the Manhattan penthouses that featured in architectural magazines, but it was theirs, fully paid for, with a yard where the boys could play and rooms where they could grow. "This is really ours?" Michael asked as they toured the empty house for the first time. "No more landlord?" "Really ours," Sarah confirmed. "We can paint the walls any color you want, plant a garden in the backyard, make it completely our own. It's not a mansion," she added, seeing Ethan run his hand along the modest but solid banister. "But it's our home, and nobody can take it from us." The twins' transition to their new private school came with its own challenges. On their first morning, both boys stared at their uniforms with unconcealed anxiety. "What if everyone else is smarter than us?" Michael whispered as Sarah adjusted his tie. "What if they don't like us because we're different?" Ethan added, tugging at his blazer. Sarah knelt before them, straightening Ethan's collar. "You are both extraordinarily bright, kind, and curious. Exactly the qualities that make wonderful friends and students. Being nervous about new experiences is natural, but I promise you have everything you need to thrive here." Her confidence was validated weeks later during a parent-teacher conference. "Your sons are exceptionally gifted," their homeroom teacher explained. "Michael's mathematical abilities are beyond anything I've seen in 20 years of teaching, and Ethan's scientific intuition and emotional intelligence are equally remarkable." "They're adjusting well socially?" Sarah asked, her primary concern always their emotional well-being. "Remarkably so. They're supportive of each other but developing distinct friendships and interests. It's unusual to see such well-adjusted children, particularly given their circumstances." The teacher hesitated on the last word, clearly referring to their fatherless upbringing. "Their circumstances include being deeply loved and supported," Sarah replied evenly. "I've found that's the most important factor in a child's development." As Mitchell Tech's reputation grew, so did Sarah's professional profile. The invitation arrived by courier, an embossed card requesting her participation as a speaker at the National Medical Technology Symposium, the industry's most prestigious gathering. Standing in an upscale department store fitting room, Sarah eyed the price tag on a tailored blazer with disbelief. $600 for a jacket? That's more than my first month's rent. "It's an investment," the personal shopper encouraged. "You're representing a multi-million-dollar company now. Perception matters in this industry." Sarah studied her reflection, noting how the structured shoulders and precise tailoring transformed her posture, how the quality fabric draped differently than anything she'd worn before. The price was outrageous, but the message it sent was clear. "I belong in these rooms. I deserve my seat at this table." "I'll take it," she decided, adding it to the selection of professional attire that would become her armor for navigating the upper echelons of the business world. While Sarah stepped onto the stage for her first major industry address, nervous but determined, she couldn't have imagined that in just 2 years she would be presenting a revolutionary technology that would forever change cancer treatment and put her name in global headlines. The stage lights dimmed as Sarah concluded her presentation, the applause washing over her like a validation she never knew she needed. 2 years had passed since that first industry speech, and now at 33 she commanded rooms with a natural authority that made it easy to forget the trembling young woman who had once practiced her talking points in a bathroom mirror. Back in her office at the Mitchell Tech Solutions headquarters, now occupying an entire floor in a Brooklyn high-rise, Sarah stared at the diagram covering her wall. Lines of code, flowcharts, and medical imaging samples created a tapestry of possibility, the foundation of what could become her most significant breakthrough yet. "Mom, we brought dinner." The voices of her 10-year-old twins broke through her concentration as they bustled into her office, followed by David, who carried takeout bags. "You've been staring at that wall for 14 hours, David said, setting down containers of Thai food. The boys thought an intervention was necessary. Sarah smiled, realizing she had indeed lost track of time again. The twins had grown remarkably in the past year, Michael's logical mind now grasping programming concepts that impressed even her senior developers, while Ethan's intuitive understanding of biological systems had his science teachers predicting a future in medicine. "We're making pad thai and chemistry tomorrow," Ethan explained, unpacking containers in the conference room adjacent to her office. "I wanted to analyze the real thing first." Always the scientist, Sarah ruffled his hair, noticing how it was beginning to darken, losing some of the golden tones inherited from Thomas. Their eyes, however, remained that striking Reynolds blue, a daily reminder of their genetic heritage. As they ate, Michael glanced at the wall of diagrams. "Is that the cancer detection algorithm you've been working on?" Sarah nodded, impressed by his perception. "It is. We're trying to teach computers to see patterns in medical images that even trained radiologists might miss." "Like finding Waldo but for cancer cells?" Ethan asked, his fork paused midway to his mouth. "Exactly like that," Sarah laughed. "Except our Waldo is hiding in thousands of nearly identical pictures, and finding him early could save someone's life." Later that evening in their comfortable Queens home, Sarah found Michael hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, fingers flying across the keyboard with surprising speed for a child his age. "What are you working on so intently?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. Michael didn't look up. "I was thinking about your pattern recognition problem. What if instead of looking for the cancer cells directly, you looked for how they change the tissue around them?" He turned the screen toward her, showing a rough but surprisingly sophisticated piece of code. Sarah stared at the algorithm, then at her son, momentarily speechless. "Michael, this approach might actually work better than what we've been trying." The next morning, Sarah brought Michael's concept to her development team, giving her son full credit. The senior programmers were skeptical at first. Taking direction from a 10-year-old's idea seemed implausible until they ran the initial simulations. "The kid might be onto something," admitted their lead developer, watching the algorithm process test images with promising results. "This lateral approach is elegant." Sarah's intuition told her this project needed specialized expertise beyond what her current team offered. After extensive research, she arranged a meeting with Dr. Amir Patel, one of the country's leading experts in oncological imaging. The interview took place in a small conference room at Memorial Sloan Kettering, where Dr. Patel served as research director. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes that had analyzed thousands of cancer scans. "Your concept is fascinating, Ms. Mitchell," he said after she outlined the project, "but frankly ambitious." Why do you think it will work when similar efforts by major medical technology companies have yielded limited results? Sarah met his gaze directly. Because we started by solving problems for actual patients, not for investors or awards committees. Every feature in MediTrack exists because it addresses a real need we observed firsthand in hospitals. We're applying the same principle here, starting with what oncologists actually need, not what looks impressive in a boardroom presentation. Dr. Patel's expression softened and he leaned forward. That's precisely why I agreed to this meeting. Your reputation for practical innovation precedes you. 2 weeks later, Dr. Patel joined Mitchell Tech as Chief Medical Officer, bringing with him decades of expertise and a network of oncologists eager to contribute to the project. The company created a specialized laboratory where programmers and medical professionals worked side by side, teaching the algorithm to recognize the subtle patterns that preceded cancer recurrence. Progress came in bursts, punctuated by frustrating setbacks. On a crisp autumn evening, Sarah and Amir stood before a large monitor, watching as their system analyzed a series of lung CT scans. There, Amir pointed to a barely perceptible shadow that the algorithm had highlighted. That's exactly the kind of subtle change that radiologists often miss on initial review. Sarah felt a surge of excitement, and our system flagged it automatically without specific programming for that exact pattern. This could change everything about how we monitor post-treatment patients, Amir said, his typically reserved demeanor giving way to enthusiasm. If we can detect recurrence weeks or even months earlier. We can save lives, Sarah finished quietly. The breakthrough was followed by months of refinement, testing the system against thousands of anonymized medical images. Sarah often worked until dawn, returning home just as the twins were waking for school, catching a few hours of sleep before heading back to the office. Then came the first major setback. During a crucial demonstration for Sloan Kettering's oncology board, the algorithm produced 3 consecutive false positives, suggesting cancer recurrence in patients whose follow-up biopsies had shown normal tissue. This is precisely the problem with AI in medical diagnosis, one board member stated flatly. False positives create unnecessary anxiety and lead to invasive procedures patients don't need. Sarah left the meeting devastated, questioning everything about the project. That evening she sat with the twins in a neighborhood park, watching them kick a soccer ball as her mind wrestled with technical problems that seemed suddenly insurmountable. "You look sad, Mom," Ethan observed, abandoning the game to sit beside her on the bench. "Just facing a challenge at work," she admitted. "Did your computer make a mistake?" Michael asked, joining them. Sarah nodded. "A big one, and now I'm not sure if we should continue the project." The twins exchanged looks before Ethan spoke. "Remember when I built that model volcano that exploded all over the kitchen ceiling?" Despite her mood, Sarah smiled. "How could I forget? We were finding baking soda for weeks." "You told me that scientists learn more from failed experiments than successful ones," he reminded her. "Isn't your computer just having a failed experiment?" Michael nodded in agreement. "And you always tell us that when we fail at something, we should figure out why and try again, not give up." Sarah looked at her sons, these remarkable children who reflected her own determination back at her. "When did you two get so wise?" "We had a good teacher," Michael shrugged. That weekend, Sarah gathered her core team at the office. They ordered pizza, set up whiteboards around the conference room, and systematically dissected every aspect of the algorithm that had failed. By Sunday evening, they had identified the critical flaw, an overweighting of certain tissue characteristics that created the false positives. "We need to completely rebuild the pattern recognition module," Sarah concluded, rubbing her tired eyes. "Start from scratch with a more balanced approach." For 3 weeks, the team worked relentlessly, refining the algorithm with each iteration. When they finally retested against the same cases that had produced false positives, the results were clear, accurate identification without the previous errors. The second presentation to Sloan Kettering's board had a dramatically different outcome. The oncologists watched in growing amazement as the system correctly identified subtle recurrence patterns in historical cases, sometimes months before they had been clinically detected. "This is remarkable," admitted the board member who had been most critical previously. "The precision is unlike anything I've seen." The director of oncology extended his hand to Sarah after the presentation. "We would like to be the first hospital to implement the Mitchell AI detection system for our post-treatment monitoring program." Walking out of the hospital into the crisp winter air, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Heard the demo was a home run. The Wall Street Journal is calling for an interview. This is big, Sarah." The following week, Sarah found herself sitting across from a journalist in the sleek conference room of Mitchell Tech's offices, now adorned with awards and recognition the company had accumulated over the years. "So, Ms. Mitchell," the journalist began, "your story is rather extraordinary. How does a single mother with no medical background create technology that's being called revolutionary by leading oncologists?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "By listening to the right problems. When I built my first medical application, it was to help my elderly neighbor manage her cancer medications. I wasn't trying to disrupt healthcare. I was trying to solve one person's very real challenge. That approach has guided everything we've built since." "And how did you balance raising twins as a single mother while building a multi-million-dollar company?" "One day at a time," Sarah answered honestly. "With a support network of remarkable people, and by including my children in the journey rather than separating my life as a mother from my life as an entrepreneur." The resulting article appeared on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section. "Mitchell Technology poised to transform cancer detection. How a former waitress built a healthcare revolution." As the Mitchell AI detection system began clinical trials at Sloan Kettering, other prestigious hospitals reached out about implementation. Within months, the preliminary results exceeded even their optimistic projections. The system consistently detected cancer recurrence patterns an average of 4 weeks earlier than traditional methods, with a remarkable 94% accuracy rate. Across town in the gleaming offices of Reynolds Investments, Thomas Reynolds scanned through the quarterly investment outlook compiled by his analysts. A section titled "Healthcare Technology Emerging Opportunities" caught his attention. "Mitchell Tech Solutions stands out as a particularly promising investment target," the report stated. "Their recently patented AI cancer detection system has demonstrated unprecedented accuracy in clinical trials, potentially representing a paradigm shift in oncological monitoring. Current valuation approximately $300 million, with projected growth to exceed $1 billion within 36 months if FDA approval proceeds as expected." Thomas frowned slightly, a vague sense of familiarity nagging at him. "Mitchell Tech," he muttered, tapping his pen against the report. "Why does that name sound familiar?" He pressed the intercom button. "Jessica, find me more information on Mitchell Tech Solutions and its founder. Something about this company rings a bell." "Right away, Mr. Reynolds," his assistant replied. Thomas returned to reviewing the report, the connection hovering just beyond his recollection, unaware that the same issue of Forbes that had arrived on his desk that morning featured a profile of Sarah Mitchell under the headline "Healthcare's Rising Visionary," just 30 pages after a feature on his own ascension to CEO of Reynolds Investments. While the Mitchell technology gained notoriety and transformed the company into a $300 million powerhouse, Sarah had no idea that the same edition of Forbes that highlighted her as an emerging visionary contained an article about Thomas Reynolds' rise to CEO, tracing an inevitable collision course between their two worlds. The moment Thomas Reynolds closed his quarterly investment report, Jessica entered his office with a thin folder. "Here's the information on Mitchell Tech Solutions you requested, sir," she said, placing it on his desk. Thomas nodded dismissively, his mind already moving to his next meeting. Hours later, as his car navigated through Manhattan traffic, The folder remained unopened on the passenger seat beside him, the name Mitchell still tugging at some distant memory. 5 miles away, Sarah stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Brooklyn office, watching the afternoon light glint off the East River. The past 5 years had transformed Mitchell Tech from a promising startup into a healthcare technology powerhouse. With the AI cancer detection system now in clinical trials at 7 major hospitals, the company's valuation had crossed the billion-dollar threshold. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Martin Goldman entered, his usual confident demeanor slightly subdued. "Sarah, do you have a moment?" She gestured to the sitting area where they'd had countless strategy discussions over the years. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "I've just come from a meeting with MedTech Global. They're prepared to make an offer." Martin paused. $500 million for Mitchell Tech, full acquisition. Sarah's breath caught. The figure was staggering, more money than she had ever imagined possessing. "They're offering you personally $335 million for your controlling stake," Martin continued. "The remaining shareholders would be bought out proportionally." Sarah turned back to the window, her reflection superimposed over the city skyline. At 36, she had accomplished what most entrepreneurs only dreamed of, building a company valuable enough to attract such an offer. Yet something about it felt hollow. "What do you think I should do?" she asked quietly. Martin chose his words carefully. "As your investor, I should tell you to take the money. It's an excellent return. But as someone who's watched you build this company," he sighed, "this isn't just a business to you, Sarah. It's your life's work." That evening, Sarah brought the offer home to discuss with the twins over dinner. At 13, Michael and Ethan had grown into thoughtful young men, their insights often surprising her with their depth. $500 million? Michael repeated, fork suspended midway to his mouth. That's enough to buy a private island, or a rocket." "We could buy both," Ethan added, eyes wide. Sarah smiled. "We could, but it would also mean I wouldn't run the company anymore. Someone else would make decisions about how our technology is used, how it develops." "Why wouldn't you sell?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. "Isn't that the goal of starting a company? To make it valuable and then sell it?" "For some people, yes." Sarah considered how to explain. "But some things are worth more than money. What we've built together, not just the technology, but the team, the culture, the mission, matters to me. I'm not sure I could replicate that anywhere else." The twins exchanged one of their looks, a silent communication Sarah had never fully deciphered. "You're going to say no, aren't you?" Ethan said finally. Sarah nodded. "I think I am. Does that disappoint you?" Michael shook his head. "No, it makes sense. You always taught us that we should build things that matter, not just things that make money." 2 days later, Sarah declined the offer. The news made ripples through the healthcare technology industry. A founder turning down $500 million was virtually unheard of. The twins' school was not immune to the gossip. Michael was cornered by classmates during lunch period the following week. "Is it true your mom turned down $500 million? A boy named Tyler asked loudly. Before Michael could answer, another student chimed in, "My dad says she's crazy. No one turns down that kind of money." Michael's face remained impassive. "My mother makes decisions based on more than just money." "Must be nice to be so rich you can say no to more," Tyler smirked. "It's not about being rich," Michael replied evenly. "It's about valuing what you've built." Across the cafeteria, Ethan faced his own interrogation. "Where's your dad, anyway?" asked a new student who hadn't learned the unspoken rule about not bringing up the Mitchell twins' father. "With your mom being so famous now, how come we never hear about him?" The table fell silent. Ethan took a deliberate sip of water before answering. "He left before we were born. Decided he didn't want to be a father." "That sucks," the boy said awkwardly. Ethan shrugged. "I have a mom who's worth 2 parents, and a brother who's my best friend. I don't feel like I'm missing anything." That evening, Sarah found the twins unusually quiet during dinner. "Rough day at school?" she asked, sensing something was off. Just the usual, Michael shrugged. Everyone's talking about the offer you turned down. And someone asked about our father, Ethan added, watching his mother's reaction carefully. Sarah's hand stilled momentarily before she resumed serving the pasta. What did you tell them? The truth, that he left before we were born. Sarah nodded, appreciating her son's straightforward approach. Does it bother you, not knowing him? The twins exchanged another look. Not really, Michael said. We've always known the situation. It's just weird when other people make it a big deal. Sometimes I wonder what he was like, Ethan admitted. But then I remember what you told us, that he made his choice, and it says more about him than about us. Sarah reached across the table to squeeze his hand. That's exactly right. As Mitchell Tech's profile rose, Sarah found herself increasingly in the public eye. She was named to the state's Medical Technology Advisory Board, an appointment that came with both prestige and responsibility. Business magazines began featuring her in profiles of successful entrepreneurs, her story of building a billion-dollar company while raising twins alone making for compelling coverage. I hate these photo shoots, Sarah confessed to Elena as they prepared for a cover feature in Women in Business magazine. I became a programmer because I don't like being the center of attention. Elena laughed, adjusting Sarah's blazer. Too late for that now. Besides, if your face on a magazine inspires other women to pursue technology careers, isn't that worth a little discomfort? The twins, meanwhile, had begun applying their own technical talents. Using skills learned from years of watching their mother build a company, they initiated a program to teach coding and robotics to underprivileged youth in Harlem. We want to show you something, Michael announced one evening, placing his laptop on the kitchen counter. Sarah peered at the screen to find a simple but professional website, Harlem Tech Futures, programming skills for tomorrow's innovators. We started it last month with some friends from school, Ethan explained. We go to the community center on Saturdays and teach basic coding. We're using the curriculum you created for your first developers. Sarah scrolled through the site, emotion welling in her throat. This is incredible. How many students do you have? 12 so far, Michael said proudly. But we have a waiting list. We need more volunteers and computers. What if Mitchell Tech sponsored the program? Sarah suggested. We could provide laptops, materials, maybe even have some of our developers volunteer as mentors. The twins' eyes lit up. Really? You'd do that? Of course, Sarah smiled. This is exactly the kind of initiative we should be supporting. 2 months later, Sarah visited the community center to observe the twins' program in action. The room buzzed with energy as 20 young students worked at laptops, guided by Michael, Ethan, and several Mitchell Tech volunteers. The focus and enthusiasm were palpable. Your sons are remarkable teachers, said the center's director, joining Sarah by the door. They have a gift for making complex concepts accessible. Sarah watched as Ethan knelt beside a young girl struggling with her code, patiently explaining the error. Across the room, Michael was drawing a flow diagram on a whiteboard, a circle of students nodding with understanding. They get that from their mother, said a deep voice behind her. Sarah turned to find James Harrison, the cardiologist she'd met at a healthcare conference 3 months earlier. His presence was unexpected but not unwelcome. James, what brings you here? He smiled, the expression warming his serious face. I volunteer at the free clinic next door on Saturdays. Saw your company logo on the door and got curious. He nodded toward the twins. I didn't realize your sons were the ones running this program everyone's been talking about. Over coffee after the session, James shared stories from his practice and his life as a widower raising a teenage daughter. His genuine interest in Sarah's work and thoughtful questions about the twins made conversation flow effortlessly. I admire how you balance everything, he said as they prepared to leave. Running a company while raising 2 remarkable young men. Most people struggle with just one of those roles. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't experienced in years. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every challenge. As James walked her to her car, he hesitated. "I've enjoyed talking with you, Sarah. Would you consider having dinner sometime? Just the two of us?" The question caught her off guard. Since Thomas, she'd had a few brief relationships, but none had progressed beyond casual dating. Her focus had always been on the twins and the company. I'd like that," she found herself saying, surprising even herself with the readiness of her response. That night, after the twins were asleep, Sarah sat in her home office, staring at the business card James had given her. The prospect of opening herself to a relationship after so many years of self-sufficiency was terrifying. "Mom?" Ethan's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway in pajamas, a glass of water in hand. "You okay? You look worried." "Just thinking," she said, quickly setting the card aside. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" Ethan shrugged. "Couldn't sleep, saw your light on." His eyes caught the card on her desk. "Is that from the doctor we met today?" Sarah nodded, sometimes forgetting how perceptive her sons were. "He asked me to dinner." "Like a date?" Ethan's eyebrows rose. "Yes, like a date." Ethan considered this for a moment. "You should go." He seemed nice and smart. "It's been a long time since I've been on a date," Sarah admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how it works." "You always tell us not to let fear stop us from trying new experiences," Ethan reminded her with a small smile. "Maybe you should take your own advice." The following morning, Sarah's assistant burst into her office, excitement evident on her face. "The governor's office just called. You've been selected as Businesswoman of the Year. They want you to accept the award at the annual charity gala next month." Sarah stared at the formal invitation her assistant handed her. The New York Charity Gala was the social event of the season, attended by the city's elite, CEOs, celebrities, politicians, and old money families, including, she knew, the Reynolds family. While Sarah approved the press release about her award across town, Thomas Reynolds received an invitation to the same charity gala, unaware he was about to face the living result of his worst decision. Sarah stood in her dressing room, gazing at her reflection with a mixture of pride and disbelief. The Versace sapphire blue gown hugged her figure perfectly, its silhouette elegant yet powerful. 3 years ago, she would have balked at spending so much on a single dress. But tonight was different. Tonight she was being honored as Businesswoman of the Year at New York's most prestigious social event. "Mom, you look amazing," Michael said from the doorway. Both twins stood there in matching tuxedos, looking astonishingly grown up at 15. "Almost ready?" Ethan added, adjusting his bow tie with practiced fingers. Sarah fastened her sapphire necklace, her first significant jewelry purchase after Mitchell Tech secured its major hospital contracts. "Just about." She took a deep breath, steadying herself for the evening ahead. Somewhere in that ballroom would be people from Thomas Reynolds' world, perhaps even Thomas himself. The thought both unnerved and strengthened her. "Nervous about the speech?" Michael asked, always perceptive about her emotions. Sarah smiled. "A little, but I've faced tougher crowds than Manhattan socialites." "Like twin toddlers with stomach flu?" Ethan suggested with a grin. "Exactly," Sarah laughed, grateful for their ability to ease her tension. Nothing in the business world compares to that particular challenge. Their car pulled up to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where red carpet and photographers awaited the gala's high-profile guests. Sarah felt a momentary panic as they stepped out. This world of flashbulbs and designer couture had once seemed as distant as another planet. "Ms. Mitchell, over here!" photographers called as they recognized her. "Your sons as well, please!" The twins flanked their mother with protective instinct, their height now surpassing hers even in her heels. At 15, they were striking young men, their Reynolds features apparent to anyone who knew to look, though their confident but humble demeanor was all Sarah. Inside, the grand hall had been transformed into an elegant reception space. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over New York's elite as they mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Politicians conversed with celebrities, Wall Street magnates with fashion designers, a concentration of power and influence unmatched in the city. "Sarah Mitchell!" The mayor approached, hand extended. "The woman of the hour. Governor Williams and I were just discussing your remarkable work with the state's medical technology initiative." Sarah greeted both men warmly, introducing Michael and Ethan, who engaged the officials with surprising poise, discussing their Harlem Tech program with articulate passion. As they spoke, Sarah scanned the room unconsciously, a habit she'd developed at industry events. Across the hall, Thomas Reynolds adjusted his Tom Ford bow tie, half listening to a senator drone on about tax legislation. At 43, Thomas had achieved everything he'd once prioritized over fatherhood. He was now CEO of Reynolds Investments, having taken over from his father 3 years ago. His recent divorce from socialite Caroline Bennett had been expensive but quick, and his current girlfriend, Alexis Crawford, daughter of an oil magnate and 20 years his junior, attracted envious glances from across the room. "Darling, I'm parched," Alexis murmured, touching his arm. "Champagne?" Thomas nodded absently, his attention caught by a woman across the room. There was something familiar about her profile as she spoke animatedly with the mayor and governor, something in the tilt of her head and the gesture of her hands. When she turned slightly, the sapphire blue of her gown catching the light, recognition struck him like a physical blow. "Thomas, are you all right?" Alexis asked, noticing his sudden stillness. He couldn't answer. It was impossible. That confident, elegantly dressed woman couldn't possibly be Sarah Mitchell, the waitress from the Bronx he'd discarded 15 years ago. Yet, as she smiled, that same smile he'd once found charming in a different context, there was no denying it. "Excuse me," he muttered to his companions, suddenly needing to confirm what his eyes were telling him. He began moving through the crowd, drawn toward Sarah like a magnet. Before he could reach her, the evening's master of ceremonies took the stage, tapping a microphone to gather attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30th Annual New York Charity Gala. We begin our evening by honoring an extraordinary woman whose story personifies the American dream. Born and raised in the Bronx, she built from scratch a medical technology company valued at more than $2 billion, whose innovations save thousands of lives annually. Forbes has named her one of the 50 most powerful women in business, and the Wall Street Journal highlighted her technology as the decade's greatest medical innovation. Please welcome with warm applause this year's Businesswoman of the Year award recipient, Sarah Mitchell." Thomas felt the floor drop away beneath him as the entire room rose in standing ovation. He remained seated, paralyzed, watching as Sarah, the woman he'd once told would never have a place in Manhattan high society, gracefully ascended the stage, her sapphire gown catching the light, her presence commanding the room. Her acceptance speech was eloquent and humble, focusing on innovation and social responsibility rather than personal accomplishment. Thomas barely registered the words, his mind reeling with the implications of what he was witnessing. The waitress with no future he'd dismissed with a $50,000 check now commanded a business empire worth billions, more than Reynolds Investments itself. After the award presentation, Thomas made his way to the bar, ordering a double martini which he drank quickly before requesting another. The initial shock had given way to a toxic blend of fascination and resentment. Who did she think she was, surpassing Thomas Reynolds? Had she engineered this deliberately, climbing to these heights to spite him? He watched from a distance as Sarah circulated through the room, accepting congratulations with genuine warmth. Her sons, his sons, followed at a slight distance, their own orbit of admirers forming around them as word spread of their charitable work in Harlem. When Sarah momentarily separated from her entourage near the Egyptian exhibit, Thomas seized his opportunity. Drink in hand, he approached with practiced nonchalance, waiting until she stood relatively alone. "Sarah Mitchell, what a surprise to find you here." She turned, and Thomas had the fleeting satisfaction of seeing shock register in her eyes before a mask of professional composure took its place. Despite his attempt at casual superiority, he found himself unnerved by her direct gaze, so different from the uncertain young woman he'd known. "Thomas Reynolds," she replied with a slight nod. "Not as surprising as you might imagine. I'm afraid you missed my speech about how I built my company." "I caught enough," he smiled, sipping his martini to disguise his discomfort. "Impressive how a waitress's assistant has accomplished so much. Imagine if you'd accepted my financial help back then." Sarah's eyes flashed dangerously. "You mean the $50,000 check I tore up the night you said my children and I weren't worthy of the Reynolds name?" Thomas felt his blood freeze as he realized several people nearby had overheard her comment. Among them, he recognized the editor-in-chief of the New York Times, whose interest was unmistakably piqued. "Let's not distort the past," he said, lowering his voice. "We were young, I had family obligations, expectations to meet. I'm not distorting anything. I'm eternally grateful, actually." Sarah's smile was genuine. "If you had stayed, I would probably just be a banker's decorative wife, instead of the CEO of a company worth 3 times yours." Thomas swallowed hard, his expression hardening. "So that's what this is about? A competition to prove your worth? Congratulations, you've won. Now can we discuss this like adults? Perhaps I could meet my mom." 2 identical voices interrupted their exchange. Thomas turned to find himself face to face with twin young men approaching, tall, with chestnut hair and striking blue eyes identical to his own, the same strong chin that had defined 3 generations of Reynolds on Forbes covers. "Michael, Ethan," Sarah smiled warmly. "I'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Thomas Reynolds, an old acquaintance." The twins extended their hands politely, showing no sign of recognition. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reynolds," said one, Michael or Ethan, Thomas couldn't tell. "We just saw your name in the donors wing. Your contribution to the Byzantine art department is impressive." Thomas shook their hands mechanically, unable to process what was happening. These were his sons, undeniably his, and they had no idea who he was. "Are you ready for your speech?" Sarah asked them. "Yes," the other twin answered. "Just nervous about speaking about the Harlem program in front of so many people." "Program?" Thomas managed to ask. "Yes," the first twin responded enthusiastically. "We founded a technology center for youth from underprivileged communities. We teach coding, robotics, and app development. We started in Harlem, but we're already expanding to the Bronx and Brooklyn. With funding from the Mitchell Foundation," the other added, "but it's entirely managed by us and other student volunteers. This year, we secured full university scholarships for 17 students." Thomas observed, dumbfounded. His children, the children he had rejected as problems, were philanthropic prodigies, already accepted to Yale, creating social programs at 15. "You must be very proud," he said finally, looking at Sarah. "Every day," she responded simply. The Master of Ceremonies announced that the young founders of the Harlem Tech program should make their way to the stage. "We have to go," one of the twins said. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Reynolds." Thomas watched his sons walk away, surrounded by admirers and mentors. The instinctive pride he felt was quickly replaced by an overwhelming wave of loss. "They don't know," he murmured to Sarah. "They know the essentials," she replied, "that their biological father chose not to be part of their lives. You never told them who I was." "What for, Thomas? So they could grow up resentful? Or worse, waiting for someone who rejected them before they were even born? Things have changed. I've changed." "How convenient." Sarah stepped back. "Now that they're prodigies accepted to Yale with political connections and a brilliant future, you're interested." Their conversation was interrupted by the announcement of the twins on stage. Thomas and Sarah turned to watch as Michael and Ethan Mitchell eloquently described their program and thanked supporters. "They have my eyes," Thomas said quietly. "But they have my heart," Sarah replied, and that made all the difference. While observing his sons speak with confidence and vision, Thomas suddenly understood what he had truly abandoned 15 years ago. Not just the responsibility of fatherhood, but the privilege of watching these extraordinary young men grow. As he stood in his expensive suit, surrounded by the society he had once deemed too important to risk for a pregnancy, he finally realized the magnitude of his mistake. Among the attentive observers watching the tense reunion between Sarah and Thomas was a social columnist known for his keen eye and sharp pen. By morning, the high society of New York would be buzzing with the revelation that the city's newly celebrated businesswoman had once been cast aside by one of its most prominent financial scions, a story that would unravel Thomas Reynolds' carefully cultivated image and force a reckoning 15 years in the making. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Thomas Reynolds' Manhattan penthouse, casting long shadows across his king-size bed. The incessant buzzing of his phone pulled him from a fitful sleep, his head pounding from one too many martinis at the Gala. With a groan, he reached for the device, squinting at the screen. 27 missed calls and dozens of text messages, all from his public relations director. "What the hell?" he muttered, sitting up and rubbing his temples. The clock read 7:15, early, even by his standards. Something was wrong. The phone rang again in his hand. "Mark, what's going on?" he answered, his voice still rough with sleep. "Thomas, we have a situation." Mark's typically controlled voice sounded strained. "Have you seen the Times this morning?" "It's barely past 7, of course not. Check your email, I sent you the link. It's not good." Thomas reached for his tablet, opening his inbox with a growing sense of dread. The forwarded article from the New York Times social column was short but devastating. Among the notable moments at last night's charity gala, attentive observers noticed a tense reunion between the evening's honoree, tech billionaire Sarah Mitchell, and Reynolds Investments CEO Thomas Reynolds. Sources close to the situation confirm that Reynolds is the absent father of the talented Mitchell twins, having abandoned the then waitress when he discovered her pregnancy 15 years ago. A disturbing contrast to the philanthropic image Reynolds has carefully cultivated. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. 3 paragraphs. That's all it took to unravel 15 years of calculated image management, to expose the truth he'd buried beneath success and social standing. "Thomas, are you there?" Mark's voice seemed distant through the phone. "Who leaked this?" Thomas demanded, his shock quickly turning to anger. "Several people overheard your conversation with Mitchell. The Times columnist was standing nearby. But that's not our biggest problem right now. Smithfield Financial and the Palmer Foundation both called for emergency meetings to reassess their relationship with Reynolds Investments. Smithfield and Palmer were 2 of their most significant institutional clients, representing over $3 billion in managed assets. "Damage control, Mark. That's what we pay you for," Thomas said, his mind racing. "Issue a statement about privacy, old relationships, mischaracterizations. Already drafted, but it won't be enough. There's more. The Reynolds Family Foundation has issued a statement distancing themselves from your personal matters. And Alexis's publicist called to cancel your joint appearance at tonight's benefit." Thomas closed his eyes, feeling his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "What about my father?" Mark's hesitation spoke volumes. "Lawrence called a special board meeting, 1 hour from now. Your presence is, quote, mandatory." Thomas knew what that meant. Reynolds Investments managed money for old New York families who valued discretion and respectability above all else. Scandal was unacceptable, especially one involving abandonment of children. Children who had grown into the kind of young men those same families were now praising as the future of New York philanthropy. "I'll be there," Thomas said, ending the call. As he stepped into the shower, letting scalding water flow over him, Thomas tried to formulate a strategy. The board couldn't remove him entirely, he held too much Reynolds stock, but they could sideline him, appoint an interim CEO until the situation blew over. His father had done the same to an uncle 20 years ago after a messy divorce made headlines. Across town, in her airy Tribeca penthouse, Sarah was enjoying her morning coffee when her phone rang. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Caroline Walsh from the governor's office." Sarah set down her coffee. "Good morning, Ms. Walsh. The governor was extremely impressed with your sons last night. Their presentation on the Harlem Tech program was remarkable. He would like to invite them to join the state's Educational Innovation Task Force as youth advisors." Sarah smiled, maternal pride warming her chest. "They'll be thrilled. That's very kind of the governor." "There's more," Caroline continued. "The governor would also like you to chair the technology committee. Your perspective on how technology can enhance educational outcomes would be invaluable." After accepting the invitation and ending the call, Sarah looked up to find Michael and Ethan entering the kitchen, still in their pajamas despite the late morning hour. They moved directly to the refrigerator, engaged in an animated discussion about potential improvements to their program's website. "Good morning," Sarah interrupted, amused by their single-minded focus. "There's a reason your phones have been buzzing non-stop. The governor wants you both on his Educational Innovation Task Force." That caught their attention. Michael poured himself a glass of orange juice while Ethan gathered ingredients for breakfast. They moved with the easy coordination of twins who had shared space their entire lives. "The task force sounds cool," Michael said, leaning against the counter. "Mom, that man last night, Thomas Reynolds, he was our father, wasn't he?" The glass nearly slipped from Sarah's hand. How do you know?" Michael exchanged a glance with his brother, a silent communication developed over 15 years. "We researched him after we got home, the shape of his jaw, the eyes, and the way he looked at us, like he was seeing ghosts. Plus," Ethan added, cracking eggs into a bowl, "we overheard part of your conversation about him rejecting us before we were born." Sarah set her cup down carefully, buying time to compose her thoughts. She had always promised herself she would be honest with her sons when this moment came. "Yes, he is your biological father. I'm sorry you found out this way." "Don't be sorry," Michael said, sitting beside her. "You've always been honest with us about him not wanting to be part of our lives. We just didn't know who he was specifically." "And does it change anything for you?" Sarah asked carefully, studying their expressions. "Knowing who he is?" The twins exchanged another look. "Not really," Ethan replied, whisking the eggs with mechanical precision. "It's strange to finally have a face to associate with the story, but we don't feel any connection to him." "He might try to contact you now," Sarah warned, her protective instinct flaring. The Thomas she remembered would never let a public relations disaster go unaddressed. "What should we do if that happens?" Michael asked. Sarah reached across the counter to take both their hands. "That's your decision. I've protected you your whole lives, but you're nearly adults now. If you want to get to know him better, I won't stand in your way. If you'd rather keep your distance, I'll support that too." "He hurt you badly, didn't he?" Ethan asked quietly. "A long time ago," Sarah smiled gently. "But every tear was worth it, because they brought me you two." The conversation shifted to their plans for the day, but Sarah remained distracted, wondering how the revelation would affect their lives. She had built walls to protect her family from Thomas Reynolds, walls that had suddenly crumbled in a single evening. 3 days later, Thomas sat alone in his office at Reynolds Tower, staring at the formal letter the board had delivered that morning. He had been placed on temporary leave while the company addressed recent publicity concerns. His father hadn't even had the decency to deliver the news personally. The past 72 hours had been a cascade of humiliations. Reynolds' investment stock had dropped 7% after the scandal broke. 2 major clients had withdrawn their accounts entirely. The charity boards that had once eagerly courted his involvement now quietly removed his name from their websites. In desperation, Thomas composed an email to the only person who might help salvage the situation. "Sarah, we need to talk. About the boys. About financial arrangements. about how we can rectify this situation. Let's have dinner, please. Thomas. He pressed send before he could reconsider, then spent the next 4 hours checking his phone obsessively. When her response finally came, it was brief and definitive. Thomas, there is nothing to discuss. Michael and Ethan know who you are now, and if they wish to know you, they will reach out. As for financial arrangements, they have substantial trust funds established with my resources and are headed to Yale on merit scholarships. We don't need your money now, just as we didn't need it when you offered $50,000 to solve the problem. If your concern is your public image, I suggest making generous donations to organizations supporting single mothers. Perhaps that will help restore your reputation. Sarah. Thomas read the email 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. The dismissal was complete. Not angry or vindictive, but calmly indifferent, as if he were simply not worth the emotional investment of resentment. A week later, Thomas sat alone in his penthouse, nursing a scotch and watching the city lights flicker below. His temporary suspension had become indefinite. Alexis had ended their relationship with a carefully worded text message. His father had not spoken to him since the board meeting. A notification from his banking app interrupted his dark thoughts. A transfer of $50,000 had been made to his account. Opening the app in confusion, Thomas found an attached message. Mr. Reynolds, after careful consideration, we have decided to return the amount you offered our mother 15 years ago, with interest calculated at the prime rate. We want nothing from you, not even a debt. Respectfully, Michael and Ethan Mitchell. Thomas stared at the message, then at the Manhattan skyline beyond his window. Somewhere out there, Sarah and his sons, were building a legacy without him, an empire he could have shared, a family that could have been his. The $50,000 he had once offered as a dismissal had been returned with mathematical precision, a clear message that the Mitchell family neither needed nor wanted anything from him. The symmetry was both elegant and devastating. That same evening, Sarah stood on another stage, accepting the Medical Technology Visionary Award from the American Hospital Association. Michael and Ethan applauded from the front row, surrounded by a community that valued them for who they were, not for the name they might have carried. As she thanked the audience, Sarah concluded with words that never mentioned Thomas, yet perfectly closed that chapter. 15 years ago, someone told me I wasn't valuable enough to be part of their world. Today, I've built my own world, one based not on surnames or traditions, but on innovation, compassion, and resilience. Sometimes, life's greatest blessing is when certain doors close, forcing us to build our own. While Thomas contemplated the bank notification on his phone, he couldn't have known that in 24 hours he would be removed from the company bearing his name, while Sarah would be invited to join the Governor's Council on Innovation. The headlines in the Wall Street Journal told the story in stark terms: Reynolds temporarily removed after family scandal. 3 weeks had passed since the charity gala, and the ripple effects continued to spread through New York's elite circles. Thomas Reynolds sat alone in his study, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow. The board's temporary removal had already stretched beyond what his lawyers had predicted, and whispers suggested it might become permanent. Outside his window, spring rain washed the Manhattan streets clean, a metaphorical cleansing that Thomas couldn't help but find ironic. His phone, once constantly buzzing with opportunities and invitations, now lay silent for hours at a time. The few calls that came through were from crisis managers and public relations specialists, each promising to rehabilitate his image for a substantial fee. Across town, in her sun-filled office, Sarah answered a very different kind of call. "Ms. Mitchell? Rebecca Chen from the governor's office. He was extremely impressed with your contributions to the Technology Committee meeting yesterday and would like to offer you the chair position. Your insights on implementing AI-assisted learning in underserved communities particularly resonated with his education initiative." Sarah smiled, glancing at the framed photo of Michael and Ethan on her desk. "I'm honored. Please tell the governor I'd be delighted to accept." After ending the call, Sarah leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to appreciate how dramatically life had shifted. The revelation at the charity gala, while initially shocking, had strangely freed her. The secret she'd carried for 15 years was finally in the open, and rather than facing judgment, she'd been met with admiration for her resilience. The twins had handled the public attention with remarkable poise. Their Harlem Tech program had received an influx of donations, allowing them to expand to 5 locations across the city. Yale's president had personally called to reaffirm their early acceptance, adding that the university was honored to welcome such exceptional young men of character. "Mom?" Ethan's voice came from her office doorway. "We need to talk about something." Sarah looked up to find both her sons standing there, their expressions unusually serious. "Of course. What's going on?" The twins exchanged a glance before Michael spoke. "We've been discussing what to do about him, about Thomas Reynolds." Sarah gestured for them to sit, her heart beating a little faster. "Have you reached a decision?" "We don't want a relationship with him," Ethan said firmly. "We've thought about it carefully. He's not reaching out because he regrets abandoning us. He's only interested now because we're the Mitchell twins who might be useful to his image." Michael nodded in agreement. "But we do want to make a statement, a clear message that ends this cleanly." "What kind of statement?" Sarah asked cautiously. "We calculated exactly what $50,000 from 15 years ago would be worth today with compound interest," Michael explained. "We want to transfer that amount back to him, with a note saying we want nothing from him, not even a debt." Sarah studied their faces, these young men who had grown into people of such integrity despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges they'd faced. "Are you sure this is what you want? You're under no obligation to reach out to him in any way." Ethan leaned forward. "We're sure. It's not about him, really. It's about us, closing this chapter on our terms." Sarah reached across her desk to squeeze their hands. "I'm so proud of who you've become. Whatever you decide, I support you completely." That evening, as the twins drafted their message to Thomas, Sarah received an unexpected delivery, an invitation to speak at a conference where Thomas had once been the keynote speaker. The organizer's note mentioned that Mr. Reynolds was no longer available, and they would be honored to have Ms. Mitchell share her inspirational journey instead. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The man who had once deemed her unworthy of his world was now being systematically replaced by her in the very circles he had protected so fiercely. Meanwhile, Thomas faced the board of the Reynolds Family Foundation, the philanthropic organization that bore his name but now sought distance from its namesake. "The optics are problematic, Thomas," said his cousin Victoria, who chaired the foundation. "Our mission supports families and children. Having our most visible member publicly exposed for abandoning his own children undermines everything we stand for." "It was 15 years ago," Thomas argued, hating the defensive note in his voice. "A mistake made when I was young and focused on my career. A mistake you never attempted to rectify," another board member pointed out. "These boys grew up without a father while you served on committees advocating for family values. The hypocrisy is what's damaging us." The meeting ended with Thomas being asked to take a hiatus from foundation activities, another polite removal from a position he had once taken for granted. Walking through the lobby of the foundation building, Thomas passed a wall of photographs showing various charitable initiatives. In the center was a recent addition, Michael and Ethan Mitchell accepting an award for their Harlem Tech program, their smiles capturing the same warmth he'd seen in Sarah years ago. He paused, studying their faces, his eyes, his jawline, their mother's compassion. What might his life have been if he'd made a different choice that January night? The question haunted him as he returned to his empty penthouse, where a notification alerted him to the twins' transfer and message. Reading their perfectly formal note, Thomas felt something crack inside him, the carefully constructed justifications he'd built around his decision 15 years ago. For the first time, He allowed himself to truly imagine what Sarah had endured, pregnant with twins, abandoned, struggling to survive while he continued his privileged life uninterrupted. The magnitude of his callousness struck him with the force of physical pain. On impulse, Thomas grabbed his coat and headed to Mitchell Tech's headquarters. He needed to see Sarah to say something, though he wasn't sure what words could possibly bridge the chasm he had created. The receptionist at Mitchell Tech's sleek lobby looked surprised when he gave his name but made the call upstairs. Minutes later, he was escorted to Sarah's office, a corner suite with views of the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan skyline. Sarah was standing by the window when he entered, her posture straight, her expression composed. She looked more elegant than he'd ever seen her, in a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of confidence rather than the defensive armor he wore his own expensive clothing as. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, not moving to shake his hand. "I got the transfer. From the boys." Thomas remained near the door, suddenly uncertain in this space that was so completely hers. "I needed to talk to you. In person." "About what? I thought our conversation at the gala was quite comprehensive." "For 15 years I've been waiting for this moment," Sarah said after a pause, her voice steady. "I imagined all the things I would say to you, all the ways I would make you understand what you did to us." Thomas swallowed hard. "I made the biggest mistake of my life that night. I lost much more than I realized." "You didn't lose anything, Thomas," Sarah corrected him, her gaze direct. "You gave it up. There's a significant difference." Thomas moved further into the office, noting the photographs of the twins that lined one wall, a chronological display of birthdays, school events, and achievements, a visual record of all he had missed. "I was young, scared, concerned only with my career and status," he tried to explain, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "And I was a waitress pregnant with twins, without health insurance or a support network," Sarah countered. Who had more reason to be frightened? The question hung between them, unanswerable. "The boys," Thomas began hesitantly. "Do you think they might ever want to know me? Really know me, not just as the man who abandoned them?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "That's their decision now. They're nearly adults. I'll respect whatever they choose." Thomas nodded, understanding the implicit message. She would not advocate for him. He would have no shortcuts to redemption. As he prepared to leave, his gaze lingered on a photograph of the twins at about age 10, building a science project together. "They look happy," he said quietly. "You did an amazing job raising them." "They are extraordinary young men," Sarah agreed, not because of their achievements but because of their character. They have compassion, integrity, and strength. They understand that a person's worth isn't determined by their bank account or family name. The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on Thomas. These were the values he had claimed to uphold but had abandoned along with his children. Walking toward the door, he paused to look at the collection of awards displayed on a shelf, recognitions of Sarah's innovations and leadership. Among them was the recent Businesswoman of the Year award from the charity Gala. "Congratulations," he said, nodding toward the display. "You've built something remarkable." "Thank you," Sarah replied simply, "though the most valuable things I've created aren't represented by those trophies." 1 week later, Sarah stood on stage at the American Medical Association's annual conference, accepting the Visionary in Medical Technology award. Michael and Ethan sat in the front row, their pride evident in their expressions. The audience, doctors, researchers, hospital administrators, listened raptly as she described how Mitchell Tech's AI detection system was changing outcomes for cancer patients nationwide. From the back of the ballroom, Thomas watched silently. He had no invitation to this event but had convinced a former colleague to bring him as a guest. He stood against the wall, an observer rather than a participant in this triumph. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the hall. 15 years ago, someone told me I wasn't valuable enough to be part of their world. Today, I've built my own world. one based not on surnames or traditions, but on innovation, compassion, and resilience. Sometimes life's greatest blessing is when certain doors close, forcing us to build our own. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Thomas remained in place, watching as the twins joined their mother on stage, the three of them embracing as photographers captured the moment. They looked complete, a family unit that had never needed him to thrive. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd surrounded Sarah with congratulations, Thomas slipped out unnoticed. In his car, he opened his portfolio app to find another notification. Mitchell Tech had just announced a global partnership with the Mayo Clinic to implement their detection system worldwide. The stock had jumped 12% on the news. That night, as Sarah and her sons celebrated with a private dinner, Thomas sat alone in his penthouse, finally understanding that true legacy isn't found in buildings bearing your name, but in the lives you choose to value while you still have the chance. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.